Hello, and welcome to Sobercast. We provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in a podcast format. We are an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into the virtual basket. Also, if you're a member of NA or have friends that are, please tell them about our other podcast, NAPOD. NAPOD features NA speakers and workshops in the same format as Sobercast. We upload a new speaker every day, and it's easy to subscribe by searching for NAPOD, N-A-P-O-D, all one word, on any podcast player app, or go to napod.xyz if you'd like to listen online. Hope you enjoy the podcast and have a great day.
My name is Sybil and I'm an alcoholic. It was so much different in my generation. If you were in love with a guy, you married him. And I married a lot of good guys because I'm more honest now. There wasn't anything the matter with those guys. Really, there wasn't. It was me. I was a boozer. I couldn't be depended on. I was missing a lot. I was a poor housekeeper. Just all kinds of things. I don't know whether any of that sounds familiar to the women alcoholics here. But the sad part of it was, I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know what was wrong. I only knew that I made promise after promise after promise. I begged for forgiveness every time I turned up missing. I'd say never again. I meant it. I'd swear on a Bible I'll never do it again. And then in 3 or 4 days at the most, after I got over the hangover to where I could walk, I would think, well, my nerves are real bad today. And the bar was right across the street. I lived on South Figueroa, and there were bars spotted along there very conveniently, and 2 or 3 on Broadway and one way over on Western and something or other. And I was a driving drunk. I'd get in my new car, and I'd take off. And I would mean to have 1 beer. And that was the end. I'd go in and I'd say, give me a beer, please. And then that would taste pretty good. I'd say, give me a beer with a whiskey chaser. And then I'd think to myself, well, that real estate prospect didn't look like he meant business anyway. I'll just let him come back some other time. And then before I got drunk, I'd begin to worry about what kind of a lie I was going to tell. When I got home, I'd use so many. And then when I would wake up so hungover, so miserable, and I'd cry, and I'd beg for forgiveness, and I'd go through the whole thing again and get away with it one more time, and then continue to drink. I suffered. I'll tell you that after the first few drinks in a bar, I was consumed with guilt. After I got drunk, I didn't care. And I lived, at that time, on Figueroa, as I say, had a real estate office there. And one time I went over to the Broadway Ace on Broadway to drink, and when I left, I couldn't find my car, so I thought I'd walk home. And I would run a little, and I'd fall down. And I'd run a little, and I'd fall down. And then I'd crawl a little, and I'd fall down. And it was easy walking distance, but I made a big thing out of it. I don't know how long it took me to get to my house. But I do remember that when I went up the steps, there were a few steps there, that those stockings, whether they were silk or nylon, I don't remember when nylons came in, I think probably after I got sober. And they were hanging out in the back as far as they could go. Just hanging back there, dragging along with me crawling, you know. And I just pulled them off and went in the house barefooted. And wondered what kind of an excuse I could use for a thing like that, you know. I don't know why sometimes I thought it was okay to catch hell and get drunk. Oh, I'm going to catch hell anyway. I said I'd be home at 6 o'clock. I might as well stay as late as I can because when I get home it's just going to be miserable. Well, do you know that guy never did leave me? And maybe he should have. But that guy didn't. And I continued my drinking. And I was suffering and I wanted to talk to somebody about it and I didn't know what to do. And I was doing the best I could those last few years, the very best I could. Who wanted to have the cops stop them? And the cops would drive me home. They don't do that these days. But they just don't do that. They put you in the jail. In the jailhouse for sure. Now, my brother Tex was a drinker. And I bailed him out of Lincoln Heights 89 times. My brother, Tex Adams, 89 times by count. He was in there, and he'd get word to me, and I'd go down and bail him out. And I'd have my car parked as close as I could to Lincoln Heights, and he'd say, "Did you bring a bottle with you?" "Oh, sure, Tex. I knew you'd need it." And I'd take the bottle of whiskey out of the glove compartment, and Tex and I would start on that one, and God knows where we would wind up. San Francisco, Bakersfield, up in the mountains, anywhere but home. His wife was going to give him thunder when he got home anyway, and so we would just drink until he would get in a fight and get arrested and put in jail, and I'd eventually get home again. But if I didn't get drunk with him, this was his M.O. He loved his baby sister because he was 10 years older than I was. 10 years older almost to the day. I was born in May. He was born in July the 19th. And he would reason with me. "Honey, you're a woman. You shouldn't behave that way. You've got a good husband. You've got a baby. You can't take care of your house. Honey, you don't drink like other people. I want you to quit drinking." And he would just raise Cain with me drinking. And I'd look at him and I'd think, "Well, you son of a gun, I just bailed you out of jail just last week. And they've never put me in jail yet, you know." So I was doing the best I could, and life was just rotten and miserable, and I ought to go back a little bit. I was a bee girl down on 5th Street very, very briefly during the Depression. I had a little joint, not much bigger than this. A little wider, I guess. And the guys would pass by, and they'd come in, and I'd say, "Do you want a good drink?" And they thought they were going to get booze. That was before repeal, I'm talking about, where you had to have a bootlegger. And there were plenty of them on that street, believe me. King Edward's Hotel. I'd drink in there, and Tex would kick me down the stairs. He wouldn't allow me to drink on Skid Row. He'd catch me, and he'd punch me out a little bit. Not enough to hurt, but get me by the shoulders and roust me out of there. And I had this bee joint down there very briefly, and things got kind of rough. And I met the handsomest man I'd ever seen. I was separated from my husband at the time, who had given up on me, and he looked like a guy in the movies, George Raft, with his hat pulled low, you know. And so I just cottoned to him right away. So we opened a bootlegging joint in Long Beach. And the cops came and raided the place, and I got away. I just scented cops, and I just walked out of there before they raided the place upstairs. And that was the end of that little caper. And all the time, if I had just had somebody that knew it was a disease, nobody knew that. And this guy, Dick, he says, "You're not going to drink while you're with me. You drink too much. And I don't ever drink except maybe an occasional beer. And so you've got to stop drinking." And I said, Sure. And sure, I will. But he opened a bootlegging joint in Long Beach, and I went down there, and I started drinking his booze. And he squared off and punched me out. And I mean, my face was battered to a pulp. And my eyes were both black, and my cheeks were, and a couple of teeth missing. And he nearly killed me. And I had to go home to my mother's house looking like that. And didn't want to, but I had no other place to go. And she was very sick with a heart ailment. Took me a while for my face to heal. In the meantime, that buzzard called up every day and saying, "If you don't come back to me, I'm going to kill your big brother Tex, who's opened a bootlegging joint in Long Beach, and there's no room for two of us. So I'm going to kill him." And it would worry me sick. He finally disappeared from the scene, but that was a miserable situation to allow to happen for someone who thought of herself as a good girl. Not bad. Drank, but didn't they? And didn't they get sick and throw up? Yeah. I knew better, but I didn't know it was alcoholism. I could have maybe gotten some little comfort from it. It wouldn't have helped at the moment, of course, but I would have gotten some comfort from it if there had been any place to go. But the final straw was I got in my car to go have my 2 beers, and I wound up in San Francisco over the Ridge Route, which is just a muddy trail at that time, hard to get over. And I looked around in San Francisco and thought, what am I doing here? A driving drunk. And I got back on that ridge route, and a squad car stopped me, and he said, you're too young for this kind of thing. Now, we're going to follow you off this ridge route and see that you get back to your mother. In fact, we will drive you to her door. They don't do that, but they did. And they followed me to Mama's door and didn't arrest me. Now, then, it was after I came in Alcoholics Anonymous and the women began to come in that I found out that a lot of them had spent a lot of time here and there, off and on, a week, a month, or 2 months, or 6 months, or whatever, for driving drunk. But they turned me loose, so help me, they turned me loose, and it probably would have been a lot better if they hadn't. It isn't that way today. Anyway, I was sick and sorry and worried because I'd used up everybody and everything when I got back from San Francisco, and I picked up a guy on the ridge route, and he was sober, and he drove. I told him where to take me, and he did, and he never laid a finger on me, but all of a sudden, we were downtown Los Angeles, and I was sound asleep in the back seat, and he shook me a long time to get me awake, and he said, "Lady, we're in Los Angeles, and here's where I leave you. I'm going on down on Skid Row." He was a nice man, middle-aged. Times were hard. He wasn't mean or anything. Wouldn't be like that today, but I reached in my purse, and I gave him a $5 bill, and I thought, how can I get this car home? What'll I tell the folks? And I looked up and I saw that sign, Sultan Turkish Baths at 6th and Hill. And I remembered that I had gone down there on numerous occasions to the Sultan Turkish Bath to lose weight because my brother Tex kidded me about being so pudgy. Because when I gained weight, it was all in my face and in my arms and in my legs. My body stayed about the same. But I would get pudgy and I'd go down there to the Turkish Bath and stay all night and, and also it got rid of the hangover. And I remembered that. So I saw Sultan Turkish Bath, and it was like some kind of a miracle to me. But I thought, I'm in deep trouble, the deepest I've ever been in, and I haven't any lies to tell. So what'll I do? I can't think. I don't want to think. So I reached over to the newsstand there, and I picked up a magazine to read. It could have been written in German or French or just anything. It didn't matter. I wanted something to read. It could have been a newspaper. It wasn't. It was a magazine. And I took it down there, and after my Turkish bath, my brain began to clear up just a little bit. No chance of sleep, of course. I picked up the magazine, and it was dated March 1st, 1941. And on the cover, it said, Alcoholics Anonymous by Jack Alexander. And I got goose pimples all over, instantly. And I stared at that. It was in letters that high across the bottom of the Saturday Evening Post dated March 1st, 1941. Alcoholics Anonymous. So I was too sick to read it, but I opened it up, and there were full-page photographs of men. It showed an ambulance, for instance, and they had a man on a stretcher, and they were putting him in the ambulance. And I didn't have to read that article. I knew that was the AA hospital where they cured drunks like me. That's just as clear as a bell. I said, that's that AA hospital that I read about in Liberty Magazine in 1939. Why I would say that, I don't know. I had read about AA in the Liberty Magazine in 1939. A short article by Fulton Ausler, but I really didn't know the content of it. I just knew it was a place where drunks went to sober up, drunks like me. So I likened it to that, and when I saw Alcoholics Anonymous, and I went down to take that Turkish bath, I followed through for the first time in my life, and I asked the attendant for paper, pencil, pen, and so forth, and stamp. Very important to have a stamp when you're mailing an urgent letter, and I never had a stamp in my life, so I couldn't even pay my bills. And I wrote a pitiful letter to Ruth Hawk, who was our founder secretary, Bill Wilson. And I said, I'm a desperate woman alcoholic, and I have no place to turn. No one will have anything to do with me anymore, and I'm losing all my loved ones. They won't have anything to do with me. And I have a little girl. And I promised myself when she was born, and I looked in her little face, that I'd never take another drink. But I did, and I have, and I will. Is there any help for me? Please let me know where to go in New York to check into your AA hospital, and I'll take the next plane and take your cure. So you see, I didn't read the thing, did I? But there was hope there. And Ruth Hawk read it, Bill Wilson's secretary, and I was amazed that I got a letter back, air mail, really quick. I went home, and I guess I got drunk during that week. I don't know what I did during that week, but I couldn't wait for an answer, and I'd go and look in the mailbox, and finally I got this letter from Ruth Hawk, which I did not keep. I'm sorry to say. I didn't know it would be of any value. She said, you don't have to come back east to find Alcoholics Anonymous. It started in California in December of 1939 with 4 men in the General Hospital. And they had a big red book handed them by a girl named Kay Miller, who was a non-alcoholic from the East. She came out here on her way to Hawaii and took this big red book over to the General Hospital and donated it to the alcoholic ward. And it said that if anyone there cared to read it, she'd leave it with them. The big, red, famous first edition of the big book. And so you don't have to do anything but get in touch with them. There's only a few men we've been in contact with them. One of them is named Frank Randall and the other one is Mort Joseph. And you go down where they are presently meeting. They've moved around from hotel to hotel, but now they have a permanent meeting place at the Elks Temple across from Westlake Park, now MacArthur Park. And they meet in a banquet room there. The desk clerk will be able to tell you which room, because sometimes they change rooms. And she laid it out ABC, so a child could even read it. And she enclosed the pamphlet, a big pamphlet, not the little skinny ones we have now, but one, their pamphlet was this size, not much in it. Really, it was just about this size, and it was thin. And I wish I'd kept it, but I didn't know I'd be standing here talking and showing you. I'd say, here's the pamphlet that was sent me. But I didn't know that. And so my non-alcoholic husband was glad to drive me down there. I was too shaky. And we got to the Elks Temple. And they directed us to a banquet room, and we went in, and there were a few men seated around a table like those out there. A big banquet table. They were seated around that. I wasn't counting, but I'd say there was 9 or 12, something like that. And I sat there with my head down and a big red turban on my hair because it was long and heavy and the permanents were lousy in those days, and I was too shaky to comb my hair, and my hair was down to here, just a mess. And this red turban and my bloodshot eyes just matched, And I had a nervous twitch that I had for 3 months after I got sober. I'd be looking at you and listening, and then all of a sudden my lip would go. And I'd know it was going to happen, but I couldn't stop it. And that was horribly embarrassing. I'd finally get to where I'd cover up my mouth for a while. And it was just awful. And I sat there just miserable, and Frank Randall was an imposing figure in his blue serge suit, and he had a magnetic personality, and he would stand at the podium like this. Hear this, you jokers. This is Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's a disease. And I want to tell you something. It's a vicious disease. And unless you come to these meetings, you're going to die. That will be your eventual end. You have to come to Alcoholics Anonymous wholeheartedly with no mental reservations whatsoever on an all-time basis. There was no day-at-a-time thing about it. You have to come wholeheartedly on an all-time basis with no mental reservations whatsoever. That would scare a person to death. Half of these people in this room would have I know some of you would have gotten up and walked out. Because I remember shaking my head sadly, and I looked down with tears in my eyes, and I thought, what an order. I can't go through with it. And he said, now it's time to start our regular meeting, so we'll have to ask the women to leave. And I was the only one there, so how would you feel? The women may return after the meeting is over for coffee and donuts. And I knew I was being thrown out. I knew that was the way they did it, and that women weren't allowed. And so I got up with my great need, with my hands over my face, sobbing, quietly, naturally, till I got outside those double doors to the lobby of the Elks Temple, and I paced up and down, and I began to mentally count how many fine-looking men were in there, all dressed up in their Sunday suits. And I got to thinking about how many of them there were, and I thought, they're doctors. They're doctors, and they could cure me. I wonder why they wouldn't let me stay. And so I cried and wrung my hands and carried on for a long time, because they had no time limit there. They were hungry and thirsty for their AA meeting, the only one in California, and they talked their heads off for as long as until everybody got tired. That's about the size of it. And Frank talked a long time anyway, and so did Mort, and then they'd talk on ask the others to participate. After it was very late and I was wringing my hands and having fits, the doors poured open. They were all laughing and chattering as they came out, and I saw my husband, and all dressed up, coming out, shaking his head. And I said, I had determined that what they were giving him was the cure to give me. The bottle of medicine or some pills or something like that would do the trick. And I thought they'd been in there all that time talking about my case. So I ran over to Dick Maxwell and I said, honey, give me my pills and let's go home. I've died 1,000 deaths. Oh, Syb, he says, you just don't know what they put me through. All they did was talk about where they drank and how many jails they'd been in, and they read something out of a book, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it. And the guy that was up in front there, he just looked straight at me all the time, and he said, I don't drink. It put me in a terrible position. And I said, but what about me? What about me? He said, they don't even know you're alive. So he took me home, and I sneaked out, and I went over to the Broadway Ace 2 or 3 blocks away, and got blind. And I would turn to those people at the bar on either side that were buying me drinks, and I'd say, and nobody knows it, but I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But thank God I called up Cliff Walker, because just as I'm standing here, I remembered the bottom line of Ruth Hawk's letter. It said, P.S. way down at the bottom. If you need help immediately, call Cliff Walker at Crestview 45678, whatever it was. He's taking care of all of the 12-step calls in California. They didn't have a central office or anybody, but Cliff and Dorothy and their kids to answer the phone in case they did get a call now and then. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I dialed that number, and poor old Cliff came to the phone and said, hello, and I said, send your AA ambulance and pick me up, I'm ready. Thinking of that ambulance in the Saturday Evening Post, you know. And he said, well, we don't have any ambulances. Well, I saw one in the Saturday Evening Post. He says, that has nothing to do with it. He said, I'll give you the address of the meeting, and you go down there Friday. I can't be there because I'm a milkman, and I pull out the load of milk at 2 o'clock in the morning. I have a Sunday meeting in my home, and you can attend that. He said, this has been a terrible mistake. I want you to listen to me until I've finished. I am going to call Frank Randall the first thing in the morning and tell him that a terrible thing happened by accident, that a woman alcoholic showed up, and they thought that you were a wife. Not Al-Anon, because that came along later. They thought that you were the wife of one of those men. They often come down there, but they go out in the lobby with their knitting when they make that statement. When they say, now it's time for the women to leave, they just get up and stroll out with their knitting and go out there and talk about their husbands or something. He said he thought you were another wife. That's all. Forget it. He said, oh, they would have been so pleased. He says, we need you so desperately. Please go back. Well, you can see that I did. I did. And so I went back down to the meeting, but I didn't go alone because my brother Tex Adams came down with me. He told me when he came over, he said, Sib, you chump, you fall for everything. It's a money-making scheme, and I will uncover it. I want to know where the money is, and I'm going to get my share. I said, oh, Tex. This is his sister who adored him. Tex, please don't go. Please don't go to AA. Please, you'll just screw it up for me. Really, I'm having a hard enough time to get in, but if you go down there, you'll raise your hand and say, I beg your pardon, dear sir, I just don't believe what you're saying. The way I look at it is. And I said, you don't do that. Those two men lead the meeting, and they do the talking, and you won't sit there and behave yourself, and they'll throw me out again, and then I'll die. Please don't go. Well, I got a right to go. I'm not thinking of myself. I'm thinking of all those winos that work for me down on Skid Row. From a rich man owning a dairy, the Lone Star Rancho, for Texas, of course, where we came from originally, he was now peddling vegetables from Skid Row and had these winos come down there to peddle the buckets full of grapes, oranges, whatever was in season, potatoes and onions, door to door. And he says, all those winos down on Skid Row, half of them don't show up because they're drunk. And if they can sober you up, they can sober up my winos. And I'm going to see what they're all about. And so that Friday night, he pulled up in front of my house, that following Friday night, in his vegetable truck, and in the back, standing up in the back, were 11 winos. And down we go to the mother group. We took up nearly 2 rows, and there were more of us than there were of them. And that's a fact. And I was so scared. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't listen to what Frank was saying about AA. I couldn't get my mind off Tex. I was afraid he was going to do something, and I was worried. I was hungover, and I wonder if a lot of newcomers don't really hear what's being said about the steps, or if they don't have much significance, they're just glad to be there and glad they're allowed to come, or they don't hear. I hope there's somebody in this room that really didn't dig it or understand what was going to happen at the first meeting, because I didn't know. I just didn't know. And then when I heard the all-time basis thing with no mental reservations, I thought, oh, no, I can't do that. I've never been sober longer than a week. That just seemed impossible. I just couldn't believe it. Now, my attitude changed almost at once, because when Frank came back with that big carton full of mail, he had about, a minimum of 250, possibly 400, maybe more, 12-step calls in that basket, tied up with rubber bands and cord, depending upon what place in California they came from. The Ruth Hawk had directed everyone to Frank Randall, the mail. Anything that came from California. I made a 12-step call in Santa Barbara. I made one in Fresno. Distance, San Bernardino. Distance didn't count if you wanted to stay sober. And he would pick up a big, thick thing with maybe 40 or 50 calls in it. He'd say, anyone here from San Bernardino? I've got about, it looks like maybe 25 to 40 letters here. Can't tell, haven't counted them. But if you're anywhere in Riverside County, I'll put it that way. These guys got to be called on and brought down to this meeting by next Friday. And Kent Hayden raised his hand and said, here. He said, come on up and get these. Ring that doorbell. Bring those drunks down here. Next, he'd say. And he would take each area. Long Beach. And Curly O'Neill raised his hand and said, here. He said, come on up here, Curly. I remember your name, Curly. You're trying to meet in a home down there on Wednesdays, aren't you? And Curly said, yeah. He says, well, come and get these calls, and pretty soon you can rent a hall. And so he went up and got a big stack from Laguna clear on around to San Pedro. It didn't matter as long as it's the coast. And he got his share. And I won't go on and on and on, because finally he got down to and I'm just fascinated. This is all quite pleasant. It's going, I'm just looking here and there. And so eventually he got down to the next stack. And he said, are you Sybil Maxwell? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, come up here, Sybil. I didn't move. My lip began twitching worse than ever, and tears came in my... He said, come on up here, Sybil. And so I finally got up there and looked up at this handsome man in a blue suit. And he said, now, Sybil, he says, do you see this stack of letters I've got here? And I said, yes, sir. He says, they're all from women alcoholics. They need help. You say you need help. I believe you need help, or you wouldn't be here tonight. Is that correct? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I tell you what, we've never had a woman alcoholic before. You're the first, but we've needed one. Now we got one. I'm sorry for what happened last Friday. But what I'm going to do, this big stack of letters here are all from women alcoholics who need help. And if they're not called on, some of them could die. He says, will you go out and see them? I says, I don't know what to say. He said, very little, you don't know anything. I said, well, what will I do? He said, very simple. I'll tell you what to do. You ring the doorbell. The girl comes to the door. You say, is your name Susie Black? Look up the name there. And she'll say, well, yes, I am. Did you write this letter to New York asking for help with a drinking problem? Well, yes, I did. Well, I wrote one like yours a week or two ago, and they answered mine. And they told me to come and get you and take you to the meeting. And I said, will that do it? I says, is there anything else I could tell her? He says, no, you don't know anything. Just bring her. Just act like you came to give her a ride. Just bring her. I said, well, I can do that. So now the next morning, the second miracle occurred, because Tex came over and he said, you know what, Sib? I don't place much hope in all this stuff, I'll be honest about it, but I thought I'd ride around with you for laughs. And it ought to be a barrel of fun. And let's go punch those doorbells together. I said, oh, Tex, you won't ruin it for me, will you? No, I promise I won't ruin it for you. I says, please don't get me thrown. I promise you're a terrible drunk. If anything can help you, give it a whirl. You never could take it or leave it like me. I just want to go along for the ride, that's all. I said, well, okay, if you just don't open your big mouth, and if you'll keep your mouth shut, I'll let you go. So we went up to the doors, and I'd ring the doorbell. And when she would come, I'd say, did you write this letter asking for help with the drinking problem? I'm Sybil, and I went down there last week and looked over those people, and they wanted me to come and tell you a little bit about it. Would you like to go to the meeting and find out for yourself? I'd be happy to drive you. And then let her, give her back her letter, and get her address, and give her your phone number, and then keep in touch with her, or go see her every day till you pick her up on Friday. And bring her down. And so that's what I did. And we took them down. Everybody that was sober was just running in all directions, just any direction they could, trying to call on the people. And, of course, 50% of those would say, oh, my mother wrote that letter, and I didn't know that. No, I don't need any help. And I'd say, well, that's all right, if you ever do, remember we're at 2200 West 7th, and here is Cliff Walker's phone number. And I would give them Cliff Walker's phone number in case they wanted help. If they took it, okay, and if they didn't, that was all right. And that's what we did. We saturated ourselves with 12-step calls, and they didn't simmer down for weeks and months. Well, really never did quit, because the central office started a few years later, and 4 years later, I believe, and it just kept on, and it kept on growing. And there was no way to stop it. No one human being could stop it. But they didn't like Tex downtown. Now, he was just too smart for them, and they were just too elegant, and he wasn't comfortable with them, and so he thought he'd start a group. And when they heard about that, they said, Tex Adams, you have no loyalty to the mother group that gave you your sobriety. How come that you rented a place for drunks out there? You owe your sobriety to this mother group, and you dare start another group? And they says, we figured you were going to do that, so we got ahead of you. We could just read the signs. Well, there was a little bit of gossiping about Tex Adams is going to start a group pretty soon, so we figured on it, and we got ahead of you. And so, now Joe here is an attorney. And I hate to tell you the Tex, but we were expecting this. So Joe, as an attorney, has an incorporated Alcoholics Anonymous in California, and no one can start a group until they're cleared through us. I was right there and heard it. Tex slapped his knees and laughed. He says, you incorporated Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, lots of luck. He says, I'd say the same thing if you said you were going to incorporate a sunset. You can't do it, because they'll lay you 8 to 5. They'll be streaming in here one at a time, and out of jails and out of nut houses, and their wives calling about them, and they call for themselves. I'll lay you 8 to 5 that this thing is going to grow so fast that it'll be no time at all that we're going to have groups. I don't mean one group. I mean there's going to be a group starting in Pasadena and one in El Monte, and who knows how far this thing can go. People will get terribly tired of driving 40 or 50 miles to go to the only group in California. You're already getting them more than you can handle here. So I'm going to start a group, and as far as you're incorporating it, that is just not too bright. And I don't intend to be down here very much. I'm going to be awful busy out in Huntington Park. I'll be awfully busy. But when I do come back, I'm just going to come down, behave myself, and sit right there, and nobody would dare put me out. And that's the way it's going to be, fellas. And that's the way it was. And so he'd been sober just a little while. And don't ask me how long. A few weeks, or possibly a month or two. Not longer than that, because first we met in Walter Watt's home over here in Walnut Park. Almost right away. And we would meet there during the week and go downtown Friday nights. And then we'd meet at Walter Watt's house until it was just not comfortable, because of the people that we called on were coming, and, it just outgrew it. And we began looking around for a hall. And we got one at the end of the J. Car line above a liquor store. And a few of them thought that wasn't proper, but it was a good hall. And we met there a few months, and it burned down. It burned down, and the guy in the liquor store below was burned with it. And so Tex had to make a fast move, and he got hold of Eldon Butler, one of the early members, and said, find us a hall. And I'll have to guess just what particular year that was, but rather soon. Eldon Butler came back and said he had the Ebell Club here in Huntington Park, and we moved over here, and here we are. And we can't even count us, there's so many. Can't even count us, and we've been here many, 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 many years. And I was married to Dick Maxwell, who was a very fine man, and all of a sudden he had misunderstood what Alcoholics Anonymous was about, I guess. Tex lived with me at the time. He had a bum heart, and it began to get worse, but it wasn't bad enough, but he couldn't drive to the meeting when he wanted to. We began meeting Tuesdays and Fridays and different nights and days, and we kept this one for special purposes and moved down to the hole. And the way that happened was we were on a Sunday night. We met here like Thursday night downtown. Maybe it was a Friday. Jim Farwell would tell you. And the person that was talking up here at the participation meeting, like you, for instance, you'd say, I'll never forget what Susie said down at the hole in the ground, and he'd point. Everybody who spoke about the basement, we called it the Huntington Park Group, it was listed that way, would point down below and say, as Mary was saying down at the hole in the ground, and it caught on. And so we put it in the meeting directory when meeting directory started as the hole in the ground, because it was the basement, and that was that. And we would have one meeting a night closed to alcoholics only, and then Sunday night upstairs. And in those days, we wanted the general public to know about it, and we'd invite the ministers and the doctors and everybody, non-alcoholic, the probation department, because Tex was on probation 2 years, still had 2 years to go, nearly 2 years, for some offense he'd committed while drunk. And he finally had... And Johnny Howe, the head of the probation department, and Don Sanford would come out here and talk to us and tell us about the terrible cases of alcoholism that they had to deal with. And they loved Tex. They just loved Tex. And he got along well, and things grew and grew and grew. But I began to see some bad signs there at home. I wasn't getting along too well with Dick. He would heave deep sighs but wouldn't say anything. Are you going over there again tonight? Yes, Dick. I thought you would. Well, why don't you come with me? Because I don't drink. I know that, but a lot of the husbands come with the women now. Because I had called on enough women alcoholics, they were all over the place. A lot of the husbands come. Not me. I'm not a drunk. And I'd say, well, honey, listen, you've been so good to me. He had adopted my baby, and he adored her. My daughter, Addie, who just went home from spending Christmas with me just before Christmas. She's been sober 6 years in Alcoholics Anonymous now. She's 55 years old. 6 years sober. Proud of her. But Dick got unbearable. He had adopted her. He was good to her, and it just got so bad that after she got married at an early age, and at 16, it didn't take, of course, but I finally, when I came home from the meeting one night, he met me at the door with the biggest smile on his face you ever saw, and he says, honey, I have great news. And I says, well, I'm so glad. Let's go in the living room and talk it over. What is it? We went in the living room, turned on the light. He said, I have decided that I want you to go back to drinking like you did in the good old days, and I'll take care of you. His exact words. He said, anything would be better than this. You just go ahead and drink to your heart's content. And I'll take care of you. You won't have to suffer at all. And I stood there and I looked at him. I didn't blow my top and cuss and rant and scream and holler, which I was wont to do, but didn't. I didn't that time because I was speechless, really speechless. I couldn't believe it. I was stunned is what it was. I couldn't believe it. He wanted to kill me. How could he know the nature of this thing when there was no Al-Anon and no one to teach him that it was a disease or anything? He had just lost his wife, whom he loved dearly, and that's what it amounted to. So I went upstairs and packed my clothes. I owed him so much. My daughter was still married to that nice young man, and I had I had a housekeeper there to take care of the big house that we lived in and everything, and I packed a suitcase, and I went out in the driveway where my new car was sitting, and I thought, nope, give yourself a clean break. He's a good man. You just can't give up. That's all. And I caught a streetcar down to West Adams where there's some old homes down there that rented housekeeping rooms with a gas plate. And I rented one of them for $7 or $10 a week. And I got so lonely. So terribly lonely. That Doheny church was down there on the corner on Figueroa, and every morning they would ring those bells, and I'd cry. And I got a job on the Times right away, had a good job down there, so I'd go on down to the Times and keep my job and work for a living, but I never took a penny. I didn't think I had it coming. I would not take a penny. I didn't take the house. I didn't take anything. I didn't take the car. I worked for a living and took the streetcar out here to the hole in the ground as often as I possibly could. I needed AA then more than I needed any medicine in the world, and I thought to myself then, if AA won't work when the chips are down, it sure isn't worth a plugged nickel when things are going right anyway. It's got to work when things are bad or it's no good. And I'd come out here and I'd cry on Ray Walters' shoulder and Eldon Butler's shoulder and tell them how miserable I was living in a housekeeping room and that I missed my daughter and she was married and they weren't getting along very well either. Everything was going to hell in a handbasket, but I never thought of drinking. I knew better. I believed them when they said that we could do this thing on an all-time basis. But by this time, on an all-time basis, if you continue to go to AA and practice the steps, as it really meant. And life was very hard. And there wasn't any doubt of it. I wasn't happy. I just wasn't happy at all living there alone. It was a rotten situation. But I worked for a living and supported myself and went to meetings, and then things began to get a little better, as they do. And in coming out here to the meetings, I met a fellow by the name of Jim Willis, who got sober, and I loved him dearly. And he didn't seem to want to stay sober, but stuck with him. And then he got sober for 5 years, and guess what he did? He was taking me to Reno and Las Vegas every weekend, and I didn't know anything about compulsive gambling. We lived in Reno for 6 months while he gambled away our savings. I didn't know there was no name to gambling then, compulsive gambling. And I lived with him long enough for him to start Gamblers Anonymous with 5 years sobriety. And the meetings were held in the Mayfair Hotel over on West 7th Street. And I went over there with him when there were only 4 gamblers there. And then 8, and then how many groups do they have now? And I started Gam-Anon, based upon Al-Anon. And I got the Al-Anons to help me with it. And I wrote a book for them called Gam-Anon. And then I stepped aside and went back to AA more regularly because, I got thoroughly exhausted working at the central office in the daytime, going over to the GA group one night, the Gam-Anon meeting one night, the hole in the ground the next night. I didn't know whether I was a gambler, an alcoholic, or both, or what. And so it was. And so I'm trying to tell you that life can get rough and it'll get good again if you'll just believe, as I did, that it will. Nothing lasts forever. Not happy. It doesn't say that we're going to be so happy that we just can't stop laughing. We've got to believe that this program will work through death and disaster and earthquakes and every other thing that goes along with it. Family dissension, no families at all. I know a lot of people without families and they're just happy as a bug in the rug. I'm an emotional type of a person. When I'm unhappy, you can hear me suffer from Highland Park clear down. But I get over it. I had Peggy next door to me for a long time, and Peggy drove me to meetings just any time I wanted to go. Still will, I'm sure, though she's moved. I got a lot of gals in AA that will pick me up. And now I'm old enough I can get the fellows to drive me to AA. It doesn't matter what age they are anymore. Nobody wants to flirt with me. Bob and I have been married for 20, how long have we been married? Getting up there 25 years, I guess. And I want to keep him. He said, I knew him when he came down to the hole in the ground the first night. And I was leading the meeting, and I hadn't seen him before, and I walked over to the podium where he was standing by the door to the kitchen. I said, are you new? I thought he was a new man. He said, no, I'm from Norwalk. I thought that meant Nut House. And so I said, oh, please come with me. I want to introduce you to Joe over here. He's from Patton. He said, I don't mean that. He said, I live in Norwalk. I wanted to come to this meeting. I heard it was the best one anywhere. He said, I live in Norwalk. But the thing is, he moved over here to 58th Street, just 1 block the other side of Slauson, and a lot of people from the hole in the ground would go over there after the meetings, and Helen would make snacky packs for us. Homemade cakes and coffee, and we'd stay there night and day practically. It was just like a clubhouse is what it was. And we just adored that guy. And then he turned up missing. He turned up missing. He lost his wife and his family, and he went back to drinking. He went back to drinking for many years. Now then, I left Jim Willis because he left me for, I stayed with him through Gamblers Anonymous, but he left me for a pretty young blonde, and that I couldn't take. So, all right, I'm so upset that I drive down here to the hole in the ground after the meeting, and Duke is there. And I sit there talking to Duke and crying and telling him my terrible problem, just bawling my eyes out. And there was a terrible noise. Duke said, what the hell is that? I said, I don't know. He said, listen to it. It was just awful. It sounded like it was coming from up those steps there. He said, why, my God, I got to go see. And it was Bob Corwin kicking the door in, trying to get back in to stay sober. He had peeked through those windows. He said he had often come down and peeked through the windows, and he could look in there and see us. He'd see me, and he'd see Duke. But he said he didn't have the guts to come back when he was ready. But that night he had the guts, but he waited till the meeting was over before Duke left, but he didn't expect that he'd bump into me. We were such good, close friends. And so I got him and took him home and made him sleep on the couch, and he went to AA, and that was the name of that tune. He hasn't had a drink since. A different man, a different look on his face, with a resolution that he was going to die very quickly if he didn't do something about it, and he came to believe. From a hardcore atheist, he is a very spiritual man and talks at the spiritual meetings an awful lot in a way that doesn't displease anyone. He simply tells how it happened. And what a story. And we could go on with these stories, forever and a day, about the people that we thought couldn't make it, and they do, if they live long enough. If they believe that there is hope here, that they will have people who love them so much that people will worry about them if they're missing and will call them up. It's the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. And I just don't know what I'd do without it. And I might not be here tonight if I hadn't heard Tex say something one night. I'm not a fast learner. One night after the meeting, at the hole in the ground, this guy named Joe came up to Tex and said, Tex, he said, everybody else down here stays sober, and I can't look over the crowd tonight and see anybody that keeps getting drunk and coming back and getting drunk and coming back. And you know, I've missed a step, Tex. I just know that there's a step that I've missed, but I don't know which one it is. Would you tell me which step I've missed, Tex, because I really want to stay sober? Tex says, well, wait till the crowd leaves. There's so much smoke in here, and my old ticker's bothering me. And then we'll go out and we'll sit on the curb on the steps. It was hot. It was July, I suppose. He says, I got to get some air, and then we'll talk about it. You think you've missed a step, Joe, and that would be the answer to it if you knew which one? Okay. Here we go, Joe. Now, they're all gone. Yeah, they're all gone, so we'll close her up. Come on, Sib. And they sat on the steps. I had to sit there because I drove him over, you know. There was Tex, and there was Joe, and I was on the other side of Tex. And he sat down and he said, so you want to know what step you missed, Joe? Well, let's take the first one now. Let's just see. It might be the first one, Joe, where we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And he says, you've never admitted that. He says, when you come back from one of those short drunks of yours, I see you laugh and slap your knee and say, wasn't that a good one? As if you had fun doing it. He says, I sure didn't come to a laughing and chirping about the last drunk I was on. He said, I didn't even want to talk about the last drunk I was on. But you seem to think that it was a kind of a funny scene. He says, I don't think that you've admitted that you were alcoholic. I don't think you've admitted that your life is unmanageable. And Joe said, oh, so that was it, Tex. Thanks a lot. And he started to get up, and Tex grabbed him by the shirt in the back, and he said, sit down, Joe, I've just started. Now, let's take the second step where we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. He said every time that anybody down there talks about God or a higher power or any way it's used in the big book, you kind of snicker and say that you didn't need any help like that you're doing it on willpower. And I'll look at you and I always figure I'll lay you 8 to 5, you'll be drunk by Sunday, and you usually are. Because you think, he says, look, if you had been open-minded, just open-minded enough to not worry about that God issue and just accept the group for a while, the people that have been trying to help you for so long. You could adopt them to begin with. You could have adopted the big book as something that was sincere and believable. You could have adopted the whole group and said that that's my higher power. But you're not willing to do anything or take any steps of that kind. You just always use that word willpower, and you aggravate people. And then after that, Joe, now sit still, I'm not through. This is where we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. And listen to this, as we understood him. See, you can understand him in any way you want. And we made a decision. And don't misunderstand me, I didn't say you did it. A lot of the people in the hole in the ground said, I've taken the third step, I turned my will and my life over to the care of God. It says we made a decision to do it. Meaning you can do it next week or next year or when you're comfortable with the idea. There's no time limit. But you haven't made that decision. Therefore, you stay drunk. Another thing we do at the hole in the ground, and we've done it from the word go, is that we take inventories. Yeah, I take them, Tex. Yeah, but you never wrote it down. You never wrote it down. If you'd have read a little further in the big book, it tells you how to do it and even gives an example. It says, we made a list. We made a list. Have you ever made a list, Joe? Well, no, Tex, I'll tell you the way. I don't want to hear the way you've been doing it. I'm just telling you that you haven't made a list. Now, let me tell you this. Maybe you're not in a position to make a long list as thick as a dictionary. In fact, I'd rather you didn't. Write down the name of someone you've harmed in your drinking and be willing to make amends to them and go do it. Just do something simple like that till your brain opens up a little bit. See, don't try to put everybody down. You'll get overwhelmed. Write down the name of 1 or 2 people you've harmed, something you can handle, make amends to them, and go on and on. This is an ongoing program. In fact, it's a program for life, and you can take care of it in a comfortable kind of way. But you're not even willing to write anything down and have it. Oh, yeah, I understand, Tex. I really do. So what are you going to do about the 5th one, Joe? You haven't taken an inventory. That's where the next one is where we admit to God, ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. What wrongs? You don't know what they are because they would be in your list which you have not made. And you don't believe in God. Therefore, you can't make a list of the people you've harmed because you're not open-minded enough to put down one person. One person would do for a starter. But no, you won't do that. See? entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Entirely ready to have God remove what defects of character and what God? Now, wrongs, a text will say, he said, I was back to New York and I had a week's visit with Bill Wilson. And I asked him, because there were so many arguments about it down in the hole in the ground, what the difference was in wrongs and defects of character. And Bill Wilson said, well, Tex, I'd like to tell you that I was just a budding new author. I had never written a book before, and I just didn't want to be redundant and use the same word twice. They're exactly the same. So that ought to relieve somebody's mind, because that's where we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. They're just the same as the others. So he explained that to Joe. And then he says, it's ridiculous to talk about the 8th and 9th step, where we made a list of these people that we've harmed, became willing to make amends to them all because you haven't picked up a pencil. You can't make direct amends in the 9th step to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. You can't just go out willy-nilly and tell somebody something to make amends to them when it's going to hurt the girl sitting next to him or the man sitting next to him, disrupt the whole family. Some you can't make. Some you will just have to live. And as you do good to other alcoholics, that will eventually take care of the wrongs of your past. And you don't have to worry about that anymore if you just practice the program and make amends where you can. That's all you can do. And to continue to take inventory when we're wrong and promptly admit it. You know, a drunk will never say he's wrong, never say he's wrong. But you see, then you hurt. And you don't want to hurt, because if you hurt long enough, you'll get wrong. So you got to promptly admit it. That's all there is to it. And the 11th one, Joe, I want to tell you that I had a great difficulty with that. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Break it down, Joe, into something that you can handle. You can do it. Simplify it. Take it and understand it, that it's the simplest thing in the world to do if you have an open mind. Prayer with me, said Tex, had to be, he says, you know, it was hard for me. And I decided at first that prayer was just good, clean thinking. It had to serve me for a little while until I felt that I was prepared to have a higher power do something good for me because I felt so bad about myself. So he says, you can do it so easy in that way. Now, Joe, I got to wind this up and get home. My old ticker's hurting me. But when it comes to the 12th step, where that we call an alcoholics, the 12th step, the important one, you know, go and see other people and try to help them. And practice these principles in all our affairs. It goes without saying you haven't practiced these principles in all your affairs, but I want to tell you one thing. You've never called on a single drunk. Every time that I have asked you to go see the man, you'll say, well, I'm working, or my wife's expecting me for dinner, or my boss wants me, or I promised so-and-so. You have not made one call on an alcoholic, which is the name of the game, the 12th step work, which was done by newcomers when AA started, because how were they ever going to get to be old-timers unless they called on other alcoholics, which is the meat of the program, is helping someone else. And you have not done that. You have not made a 12-step call. You're just consumed with your own self. I know I've been tough on you, Joe. I know that. But I hope you've learned enough to where that you will come back and that eventually you'll get sober. I'm here to tell you that he did, but not all at once. It isn't that easy for some. And for others, it's easy. It was easier for me to come here and get a pat on the head. That's all I needed, was to have somebody come up and say, you're looking good, Syb. And Tex would say, come on, let me get up and talk. Oh, Tex, I'll stay home. Please don't make me talk, Tex. Please don't make me talk. Well, all right. And then one time he said, Syb, tonight, Friday night, I'm going to call on you down at the hole in the ground. Now, he says, I don't give a damn whether you talk about AA or yourself. Just give a weather report or read a poem. I don't care what you do, but I'm going to call on you. Oh, Tex, please, you know I have never talked. I know that. You're not growing fast enough. The others talk, and you hide in the back row. And I'm your brother. And I'm telling you what I'm going to do, and I'm going to pick you up and take you there, and I'll make it easy. I'll make a deal with you. I'll call on you first, and you can get it out of the way. Read something. I don't care what you do, but I just want to see the footsteps getting up behind the desk down there. They didn't have a podium. Just to see you stand up there and say anything. Do it. And then every week, do it. And do it. And do it. You've got to learn how to talk. Oh, God, I won't go then. You go. So I went. And I typed on my typewriter about 3 lines of great wisdom from the book. And Tex opened the meeting and says, well, hi, boys and girls. This is going to be a good meeting tonight. You all look sober, and I'm glad to see that. And you know this is a participation meeting, and I'm not going to waste any time talking because I am anxious to hear the first speaker, who is going to be my sister, Syb. By God, I tottered up there with tears in my eyes, and I had this thing in my hand, which I read. Don't ask me what it was. It was about some step, I guess. And my voice quivered, and this paper shook. The paper shook, and I shook. And I thought I'd die. I wished I'd die. I just wished I could just drop dead. And I thought, I'm so ashamed I'll never come back. And got down to the check said, you know, he said, makes me do this, and I can't do it. But I did. And I sat down, and you know what happened? There was an ovation. They knew my problem, and they applauded, and they applauded, and they applauded. And when I sat down, somebody folded my arms because my hands were shaking, and I had tears in my eyes. Somebody put a cigarette in my mouth, lit it, and I sat there and I listened to that applause was still going on, and I thought, my God, was I really that good? I wasn't, but I'm here with you tonight, very joyously, and I want to thank all of you for being so good to me. I love alcoholics. I like sober alcoholics. I have nothing against drunk alcoholics. I just hope we can find more of them. And with your help, we surely can. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.